I'm here with Alexander Mercouris, editor-in-chief of the Duran. Alexander, let's revisit this oil tanker controversy that seems to be playing out between the UK and Iran. We had the UK off the coast of Gibraltar seize and confiscate an oil tanker heading to Syria. The oil tanker was violated sanctions policy with relations to Iran and Syria. And the UK Marines, they aggressively seized that tanker. Now we have a story playing out where the UK is saying that Iranian forces tried to seize a UK tanker. You then have the Iranian authorities saying this is not true. We didn't try to seize a UK oil tanker. I don't know who's right, who's wrong, what's going on. You know, you have these tankers, they're in the oceans, and, you know, we can't get to the truth. Well, what do you think is going on here?
Right. I think the first thing to say is that since we have so little information from the region, and since we can't be sure who's telling the truth and who isn't, that we can't say for sure who is, you know, what did exactly happen. This is the story as it's been reported in London. Now, I want to make it very clear. I'm not saying that this story is necessarily correct, but the British authorities, as you correctly say, seized this oil tanker, the Grace One, which was traveling from Iran to Syria, probably to Syria. They claim that they seized this tanker at the request of the Gibraltar authorities because it was violating EU sanctions, which prohibit the sale of oil to Syria. As I have discussed in a previous program, I believe these EU sanctions, which prohibit the sale of oil to Syria, are in fact illegal. I don't think the EU has any right to impose those sort of sanctions. And I should say that since we did that other program, I have seen a legal opinion by an a lawyer who specializes in EU law, who also thinks that the seizure by the British of that tanker off the coast of Gibraltar was illegal, and that those sanctions, those EU sanctions, which allegedly justified it, are illegal also. Now, the Iranians responded to that seizure by saying that they would then feel free to seize British tankers in retaliation. Now, I think some people who want to make out that this episode with the tanker, the British tanker that the Iranians supposedly trying to seize, most people who want to defend Iran and say that this is entirely an invented story, tend to ignore the fact that the Iranians did definitely make those warnings that they might respond by seizing British tankers. Now, what then happened is that it seems that the British authorities, hearing those Iranian warnings, became extremely concerned about what might happen to British tankers in the Gulf. So they ordered this particular tanker, which was heading towards Basra, to turn back before it filled it with any oil, and they provided a naval escort to that tanker, which in the event successfully prevented Iranian boats, armed boats from the Iranian Revolutionary Guard from seizing this tanker in retaliation to the seizure of the original the British seizure of the Iranian tanker. Now, I have to say, I think that is plausible. I think it is most likely, given the warning that they had given that the Iranians were indeed looking to capture a British tanker in order to get their own tanker released and to get their own people who are now being arrested in Gibraltar released, also the people, the Iranian crew of the Iranian tanker. So I think this is quite likely. But what I will also say is that the British themselves are extremely embarrassed and concerned with this affair, because though they're pretending that the request for the British seizure of the Iranian tanker came from Gibraltar, everybody knows that it actually came from the United States. British public opinion is strongly opposed to Britain becoming involved in a confrontation with Iran at the behest of the United States. And there are increasing numbers of questions being asked about British conduct in this episode.
Okay, Alexander, let me read you the opening paragraph from a Zero Hedge article entitled Dangerous Game, UK Deploying Second Warship to Protect Tankers in the Gulf. Amid ongoing tanker wars following the UK's unprecedented and aggressive seizure of a supertanker transporting Iranian oil to Syria last week, which led to an alleged thwarted counter-attempt of Iran's IRGC to block a UK-flagged tanker in the Persian Gulf Wednesday, Britain says it plans to send a second warship to the region. Currently, the HMS Montrose is shadowing the BP-owned British Heritage tanker after it was approached by IRGC boats. This as Britain raised its threat level to British shipping in the Gulf area to its highest. Per government statements, the HMS Duncan, a Type 45 destroyer, will be deployed alongside the HMS Montrose in the region for a short period. So now you're going to have two tankers escorting, two warships escorting these tankers. Is this some sort of tripwire? Is this poking Iran in the eye? Is this really an effort to avoid conflict with Iran? How do you see this move?
I should first of all explain that the HMS Duncan is one of the most advanced warships in the British Navy. But the British Navy and the Royal Navy and the British authorities have admitted that they do not have enough warships to patrol the Gulf and to protect all British tankers and shipping there. And what I understand is happening, the word that's coming out of London, is that having taken this, I think, disastrous decision to illegally seize that Iranian supertanker, they are now busy withdrawing all their tankers and shipping from the Persian Gulf. That HMS Duncan and the other warship, which is already there, are basically there to get these ships, these civilian ships, out. And what has in effect happened is that the Iranians, without firing a shot, without seizing any tankers, though probably attempting to seize one, but without firing a shot, just by giving a single warning, have already frozen the British out of the Persian Gulf. So I think that is what has actually happened. I don't buy these theories that I'm seeing circulating, that the British were deliberately goading the Iranians into launching attacks on their tankers so as to set up the situation for an attack on Iran by the United States. I think that if that were to happen, the outcry in Britain would be simply enormous. And I think that the very fragile government we have at the moment would struggle to cope with that. As I've said already, I think this supertanker incident, when that supertanker, the Iranian supertanker, was seized off the coast of Gibraltar by Royal Marines, I think that was already very controversial within Britain. And there's already been concerns expressed about it, including in the British Parliament. And I think now the British, looking at this situation, are very concerned about the safety of their shipping, and they're busily pulling out of the Gulf. And I think this deployment of this, by British standards, powerful warship is not intended as an escalation or a challenge to Iran in the sense of an attempt to launch an attack on Iran, for which there is no political will here. I think it was an attempt, as I said, to get all British shipping out of the Gulf as soon as possible, and to provide them with the greatest degree of protection within Britain's limited power that it can.
Okay, now shipping is a massive industry for the UK. It's very important for the UK. And you bring up a really interesting point. Do you think that Iran was playing the ultimate bluff here in that, because when we opened up this segment, you made the point to say, okay, they were about to seize this British ship, but obviously they didn't get to the point where they actually got on board and they seized it. Do you think that Iran was kind of, bluffing and saying, okay, we're going to seize this ship, here we come, knowing that this would freak out the UK authorities, and they might make this move that you're saying and pull back these civilian tankers out of the Gulf, which in essence does harm them. It does tremendous harm to the shipping industry, I would imagine.
Absolutely. I mean, Britain, and I think this is an important thing to stress. I mean, Britain may no longer be the world's premier ship-owning power as it was, 60 years ago, but it is still the centre of the world shipping industry. Maritime law is largely conducted here. And of course, British insurance companies basically underpin the entire shipping industry that goes on around the world. It is a major part of the British economy. Now, I'm not sure whether the Iranians were bluffing, because deployment of ships with armed men in them isn't a bluff so much as a threat. But it was certainly, if my analysis is correct, which, by the way, I think it is.
A calculated move, let's say. A calculated
move. Then it was an extremely effective one. What we're looking in the Persian Gulf is a game of chess, and the Iranians are masters at this kind of chess. The British no longer are. They no longer have the pieces on the board to play it in the way that Iran can, because, of course, Iran is the local power, and Britain is far away, and the Royal Navy is not the force it was.
All right, so where do we go from here, Alexander? Does this mean that, the UK is not going to have any tankers moving through that area? I mean, it doesn't seem very feasible.
Well, it puts the British in an extremely difficult position, and there must be growing recriminations in London about this decision to seize the Iranian tanker. Already you're hearing stories, which, by the way, I take with a giant pinch of salt, that there was great hesitation about seizing that Iranian tanker. And I see those as an attempt by various people to try to justify themselves and defend themselves in face of criticism over what is increasingly looking like a huge mistake. Now, what the British are going to do, I really don't know, because one of the other things that they've done by seizing that tanker is that they've lost control of this. I mean, they can't control what the United States is doing. I mean, Donald Trump, who is the president of the United States, is furious with the British over what the British ambassador, Sir Kim Dallow, has been saying about him. He doesn't like Theresa May very much either, and she is still incredibly our prime minister. He's very, very angry with the Europeans. He's not going to help the British in this kind of situation. The Europeans are also in no position to help the British either. And the British are not conducting a very successful dialogue with Iran. Apparently, a British diplomat went to Iran recently. Well, I mean, he did go recently. But all that came of that was that he gave the Iranians all kinds of lectures about what they should do to get back into the JCPOA with the United States, which the Iranians were not interested in listening to, because they feel correctly that since they've abided by the terms of the JCPOA, they've done nothing wrong. So here we see an example of how Britain loses out when instead of acting in its own interests, it does what other powerful players, in this case it was the United States, in other situations it's been the European Union, tell it to do. And then it finds itself in a very difficult situation it doesn't really know how to get out of. The story that's been circulated in London, which I'm taking not very seriously actually, is that the British are now talking to countries like the United Arab Emirates in order to try and arrange for regional countries to pursue some kind of de-escalation formula in the Persian Gulf. But the Iranians are not going to pay any attention to that because their quarrel is not ultimately with the United Arab Emirates and other minor countries, but with the United States, Israel, and Saudi Arabia. And as I said, Donald Trump is not going to pay any attention to it either, because his agenda is to choke off Iranian oil exports as he pursues regime change there.
It just seems that the UK did not think this one through at all when it seized that ship. I mean, it didn't think about any of the repercussions that were going to happen the day after, and it's now boxed itself in.
Yes, I mean, that's exactly right. That's exactly how he looks to me. And again, I have to come back to the last really strong prime minister we had in this in this country, who was Margaret Thatcher. I know, controversial to some people, but in these kind of situations, she defended British interests. I can remember her standing up to the United States over, say, Russian oil pipelines, gas pipelines to Europe, over the invasion of Grenada, over you name it. She would certainly never have said to the United States, well, if you want to stop an Iranian tanker, what prevents you doing it? Why involve us? What quarrel have we with Iran? We're not here in the business of seizing Iranian tankers on the high seas. And she certainly wouldn't have allowed herself to be maneuvered into this kind of situation. It's inconceivable to me that she would have done this. And the result was relations between the United States and Britain at that time in the 1980s were excellent because the Americans respected her. They took her seriously. I mean, they don't take Theresa May seriously. They certainly don't take our embarrassment, our terrible embarrassment, ambassador seriously, who is now, by the way, as I predicted, he's not been recalled. He's been forced to resign. And that's why we find ourselves in these sort of situations, which were completely avoidable.
And it's completely inconsistent because the UK is a signatory to the JCPOA on the one hand, and then on the other hand, they're out doing these adventures on the high seas. It doesn't make any sense. The strategy and the policy doesn't have any consistency to it.
It has no consistency at all because, of course, Britain has been looking to improve relations with Iran. Obviously, it can't put relations with Iran on the same level as its relations with the United States. But again, Margaret Thatcher would have come to Washington and told Donald Trump to his face, Britain stands by the JCPOA. It's an international agreement. The United States signed it. You must abide by it. And if you don't, we will. And as for these oil sanctions on Syria, I think it is inconceivable that Margaret Thatcher would ever have signed Britain up to those kind of sanctions or involved Britain in a regime change adventure in Syria, which has gone so catastrophically wrong, and would then have doubled down on it by seizing Iranian tankers on the high seas.
Well said. Alexander Mercouris, Editor-in-Chief of the Duran. Thank you very much. Guys, if you like this video, click on the subscribe button down below. Click on that notifications bell to make sure you get notifications every time we push out a new video. Donate to us on PayPal, Patreon, and Subscribestar. That really helps this channel out a whole lot. And you can get an audio copy of this video on Soundcloud and iTunes. So make sure to check us out on those platforms. And Alexander, people can also help us out by going to our famous Duran shop and picking up a very cool polo shirt like the one you're wearing right now. Or they could also get mugs, which I'm sure you have somewhere on your desk. Before we did this video, you said you're going to step out and get a refill of tea from one of those mugs. So
absolutely. This trusty mug I've been drinking, by the way, I should explain this time. The tea I've been drinking in London is yellow tea. It's a yellow tea, not very widely known that there is such a thing as yellow tea. It's one of the famous Chinese teas. It's originally a white tea. White tea is the very, very early tea before it becomes green, and then it's processed in a certain way to make yellow tea. It's an extremely wonderful tea, allegedly Mao Zedong's favorite tea, and the one that he and Richard Nixon drank together during that famous summit in 1972 when Nixon went to China. So this is the tea that has been drunk from this mug, beautiful 15-ounce porcelain mug, perfect for drinking tea, perfect for drinking coffee or hot chocolate, or indeed beer, which I've been drinking quite a lot of beer recently because I've been on a magnificent walking holiday through England, and you need to drink beer after you've been walking many hours as I have been, and this is the perfect mug to do it from. And you see here we've got the double-headed eagle on the mug, which is our eagle, our double-headed eagle, looking east and west. As we do, we cover all parts of the world. We've just spoken about the situation in the Persian Gulf, but we also have other mugs like this one with the double-headed eagle of Moscow and St. George slaying the dragon of fake news and untruth. And we have other mugs too. I mean, I'm in the process of getting a mug with the symbol of the Alpha Spetsnaz unit. That's Russia's most elite Spetsnaz unit, which the Russians claim is the equivalent of the US Delta Force and the Navy SEALs and the British Special Air Service, the SAS. And of course, we also have a mug like this with the Russian state symbol as on the mug that Vladimir Putin drank from at the G20 summit in Osaka in Japan just a few weeks ago, and made that incredible sensation when he did so. I would remind people that he, like me, is a tea drinker, and I sometimes drink Russian tea, as I have previously shown on other videos. So definitely get yourself one of these mugs, beautiful mugs. Keep yourself refreshed. Keep yourself well. Get your the inspiration that you get from drinking mugs like this, and drink mugs with symbols like our symbol, the imperial symbol, and the one on Putin's mug. And of course, as for shirts like this, well, as I said, whilst I was on my, I won't call it exactly a vacation, because in fact, we were still doing videos from this location, but because we don't really have
Many
vacation.
people were worried about you. They're like, is Alexander okay? Because it looks like he's lying on his bed.
I won't disclose exactly where I was, but let's say I was somewhere very special. I'll litter the place with a few clues. I mean, as I said, it's very good walking country. I love walking in the country. If you go on Instagram, you can see me with my dogs wearing a marvelous Duran shirt whilst I was doing that with long sleeves. By the way, wonderful shirt for walking for hours in. And the weather gets very changeable. Sometimes it's hot, sometimes we get showers. And this shirt was really amazing because it's comfortable through all of that. I scarcely ever wore any kind of overgarment, and I never got either hot or cold. So what better shirt could you have than that one to go walking? And this shirt was obviously, this polo shirt was ideal for the social events that I went to at some really remarkable places. And I will mention a few names, which will give some people certain clues as to where I was. Some of the houses that I visited. One is a place called Hardwicke Hall, where Mary Queen of Scots, well, she didn't actually stay at Hardwicke Hall, but her friend, a Bess of Hardwicke, she built this house, the first who defeated the Armada. And I also went to another house, which is actually privately owned, and it belongs to the Manners family, who are the Dukes of Rutland. But this isn't their main house. It's a place called Haddon Hall, and it dates from the Middle Ages. And it's the sort of place where you can imagine knights in armor, crashing around. Only in my case, I wasn't crashing around. I was wearing a beautiful shirt like this. So that's what you should be doing. You will feel completely at home in any situation, including amongst the most elevated members of the English aristocracy, people connected to the royal family, if you wear shirts like this. Of course, that may put up some people when I mention the royal family, but the highest social circles, shall we say.
Hanging out with the royals in a Duran shirt. Well said, Alexander. Thank you very much. Until next time, everybody.
I didn't say they were there.
They were, yeah. I was the atmosphere was royal-like.
The atmosphere was very royal-like.
Awesome. And guys, the link for the Duran shop is in the description box down below. Alexander Mercouris, Editor-in-Chief of the Duran. Thank you very much. Until next time, everybody, take care.